Hey yo everybody, we're back again here with the SNS variations for medium and heavy weight load. This time around, we're going to be showcasing the build in a manner where you can frontline, you can absorb damage, you can become a presence and take space off the enemy, while at the same time not getting one shot, because that's pretty much what you are when you play the light variation of the first video we showcased. But playing medium and heavy is gonna give you those benefits of surviving at the cost of doing obviously less burst damage. If this is more to your playstyle, but still keeping the presence of what an SNS GA is all about, good tracking, mobility, on top of that the damage is still quite high, and specifically being a slash damage build. And the cool thing about slash damage builds are, generally in the U region, everyone's protecting themselves against spears. For obvious reasons, it's just a little bit too overpowered. So going for slash damage means that their protections, which shouldn't be that much against it, will take a hit, a very heavy hit. So let's showcase the stats here. As you can see, we're going for the 350 strength perk no matter the two options we've displayed, one with 50 dex and the other one with a split of 25 dex and 25 focus. 50 dex obviously for the SNS scaling, just overall more damage in that regard. 200 con's kind of the bread and butter here. You could always go for 150 con, just like the light build, and increase your dex to 100, but this is personal preference. If you want to go for a more CDR build, I would recommend going for the focus. If not, go for the first option displayed there. One of the cool things about the 350 strength perk is the fact that it just does a ton of damage when you do a SNS combo. The combo being one heavy attack or one half heavy attack that will empower you into Shield Rush, which will slow and stagger them into the Whirling Blade. Spells in the last attack of the chain will increase its damage by 10%, and on top of that, the 200 strength perk will also increase your damage by 10% whenever they're slowed, on top of the opportunist as well on the skill tree of SNS. So as you can see, there's a lot of combinations that's increasing your SNS damage dramatically, and the Whirling Blade is kind of the cherry on top. You can't also avoid the Whirling Blade after you get Shield Rush, so as soon as you do the half heavy Shield Rush into Whirling Blade, you're gonna take the full combo. Alright, so we're going to show you guys the approach with medium, and then we're going to go through the heavy as well. But for the medium, you got the same skill tree here. In fact, for the heavy, it's going to be the same skill tree as well. We're going to be prioritizing Whirling Blade for the damage on the left side, and getting all of the nice perk additions on both Defender and Swordmaster alongside Shield Rush and Leaping Strike. We got the Reap once again with the charge as well as the Maelstrom. I've tried with Gravity Well and it's not too bad, but it's not great. Maelstrom's just instant burst damage. You can also use it to avoid ranged attacks such as muskets, fire staves and all that. It will just absorb it. But the other approach you can go for with this build is Whirlwind, and this is one of those builds that you can use the Tempest Fury. I didn't mention it on the light build because when you're playing light you don't really need that much mobility and you'd like to have more damage. Pros and cons, just wait out, and for the light build I felt that not having Maelstrom was a bit lackluster because sometimes you're just on top of a healer and you just need that extra pop and Maelstrom finishes the job. But with medium and heavy, you can go for Maelstrom, but I would actually recommend you guys to try out the Tempest Fury as you become unkillable. If you wanted to go for the Whirlwind, you would just have to replace all of the Maelstrom points here into the Whirlwind. Other than that, we got the gear, and it's kind of similar to the light gear when it comes to medium. You're still going to be prioritizing Elemental Version and Shuriken's heals as the priority here. But the big difference is that when you're playing medium, you got a little bit of a different weight load. You can still end up going for a heavy chest from the Glacial Tarn, and you can go for a cheeky Savage Divide medium piece with an illegal perk combo of Elemental Version Shuriken Fortification. Third perk, like I mentioned before, is still going to be the same. It's going to be refreshing, it's going to be conditioning, so weapon perks, but the priority perks is going to be Elemental Version and Shuriken Heals. But this is kind of an exception because you get Elemental Version and Shuriken Fortification together. You can't lock Shuriken Heals unfortunately, but that's the go-to if you want to really min-max. You could just craft a medium piece and go for the same as you can see here on the light piece, Elemental Version Shuriken Heals, and probably RNG, the refreshing, health, conditionings. Those are all pretty decent perks. And as mentioned before, weapon perks, Leaping Strike. You could go for Crippling Reap as well on the gear. But when you're playing medium and heavy, you kind of need a little bit more slow potential just because you don't have that light roll, you don't have that mobility like you do in light. So in medium and heavy, I would actually recommend going for Crippling Reap on the Great Axe itself, but we'll get there soon. When we're talking about jewelry and artifacts, we got tumbler feet wraps instead of the featherweight. Obviously, more shirking fortification, more shirking empowerment, as well more healing, shirking heals. And so it's a great addition having tumblers. You don't really sacrifice too much tankiness as well. You could go for void plate, you know, but tumbler is just kind of the best middle ground for medium weight loads. And then when it comes to the jewelry, once again, you can go for the yank, you can go for the endless thirst preference, right, for you guys. But if you end up going for the Endless Thirst, I would highly recommend Champion's Amulet. You're going to get a ton of empowerment, and once you switch towards your SNS or towards your Great Axe, you're going to really feel that damage when you're trading blows. Same type of ring, Privateer's Heirloom is just the best go-to when it comes to slash damage builds. And when it comes to the weapon and shield, let's actually start with the shield here. As you can see, the big difference is Fortifying Shield Rush. And I would highly recommend this for medium and heavy builds. You have a decent amount of armor rating that it's really going to escalate, and then on top of that, when you combine them with shirking fortification pieces or pieces that just give you fortification such as the tumbler free, it's really going to add up. As mentioned before, Crippling Reap here, it's got play crits and attunement to go alongside it. You can go for the avalanche and just lock attunement or play crits instead if you'd like that. Sword, I'm actually displaying a different one right now, but as I mentioned before, third perk, really there's a lot of options. I would only recommend attunement and penetrating backstab as the go-to, but you could go rogue, you could go vicious, you could go for, let's just say, another plague, you could go plague strikes, you could go trenchant strikes, trenchant crits, and so on. So a lot of options there when it comes to the sword. They're all very good perks. When it comes to the heart rune, stone form, or vines, once again is the go-to. Alright, so for the last one, we're going to talk about the heavy. So stat-wise, as shown before, you could go for the 25 focus, 25 dex, 200 con with 350 strength plus, or you could go for the 50 dex, 200 con, 350 strength plus. After that, there's also the option that you could go for shield bash instead and go for defensive formation. That's up to your discretion if you would prioritize damage over defensives. The way I see it is when you're playing heavy already, you're so tanky, you don't really need it, and you don't really want to run defensive formation on medium or light, of course, because it's more kind of a in-between damage, not necessarily a front line, but kind of like someone who can absorb damage. Whereas heavy is, you are someone who can absorb damage, but that's why we're going for the void plate. That's why we're going for a full frigid piece set here. We're going to also be changing a little bit of the skill tree here on the Great Axe. As you can see, we got the whirlwind here. We're going to go on for 3 points. If you want to play more offensively, I would either recommend getting the last point of it or the point on the right side of it, which will increase your damage if you're around multiple enemies by 10%. This one here obviously reduces your damage taken. It's 20% fortified when you're around 3 enemies, but again, you can just really be selective depending on what your kind of playstyle is going to be, what you kind of envision yourself being in multiple scenarios, what's going to be more worthwhile you take, okay? After that, as mentioned, we're going for a full frigid piece with void plate. Obviously, heavy void plate is just too good. You could go for tumblers, but you don't have as much uptime as the void plate, despite you getting a little bit more damage from the empowerment itself. It's not really worth it because you only have 2 stamina dodges. You can place in an energized rune glass, so every time you attack in between, you get 1 stam, which means you can get 3 dodges in a row if you end up attacking someone in between. I would highly recommend doing that regardless on heavy builds. For any heavy build, in fact, at least having 1 energized rune glass. In this case here, we have to lock Leaping Strike and Crippling Reap no matter what on the gear itself, because the Tempest Fury, you cannot lock Crippling Reap. It's already got the Whirlwind locked into it, and you can't have 2 weapon perks on it. I think Finisher is the only one that automatically has 2 weapon perks on it, but it's not something you can actually implement yourself. It's just done by the game. So as mentioned before, you can go for the full frigid piece set, which is very easy to obtain. It's from Glacial Tarn. You can even craft if you have the materia, but there's also another set you could go for, and instead of having Enchanted Wood Elemental Aversion locked to it, you can get Shuriken Fortification instead of the Enchanted Wood. The problem about this set is you can't actually roll the 3rd perk. It's just going to be randomized. Highest rolls are going to be Refreshing, Health, and some other random stuff alongside it. Whereas the Frigid, you can always lock in, you know, thrust conditioning is the primary, as well as the weapon perks. So no matter what, you're probably still going to have at least 2 Frigid pieces just to lock in the weapon perks. But if you want to really go for those other pieces, link is in the description below, and I'll show you where to get it through that video. When it comes to the jewelry itself, Ankh is a must when you're playing heavy. You're obviously going to be playing with a healer. If you're not, then good luck. I wouldn't recommend playing heavy loadouts on OPRs on your own. You can do it, don't get me wrong, it's just not as enjoyable. Privateer's Heirloom, you don't have to go for Mortal Empowerment in this case. You can go for Refreshing, Purifying Heart. There's a lot of other perks you can attain, but Mortal Empowerment is always like kind of a go-to, because just assume you get 2 kills, it's already a 4% damage increase. It's going to make a difference for sure. And other than that, we're just going to showcase the weapons. In this case here, since Tempest Fury cannot lock in Plagued Crits or Plague Strikes or anything along those lines, you have to go for Attunements as the last 3rd perk. And I've gone for the Plague Strikes on the sword. At least this way we got a little bit more disease to go with our toolkits. And Fortifying Shield Rush, as mentioned, medium to heavies, you should always run this perk on the shield itself. Now, you could go for Tower Shield. If you feel like you really are absorbing a ton of damage and you can't survive, go for a Tower Shield, skip Kingly Jagged Enchanted. You could go for something like Sturdy. You could go for something that has protection types, so that'd be Flame Protection, Thrust Protection, up to you, but that's an option, of course. Now, I believe that when you're playing heavy 200 con Void Plate with a lot of the conditionings and a lot of defensive perks, you don't really need a Tower Shield unless you're getting right in between all of the enemy DPS and their decks or flex, and you're just trying to attract all the damage onto you. Then Tower Shield's great. If that's not the case, go Round Shield. You got Leadership, you're going to do a ton of damage, even on a heavy loadout. I would highly recommend the Brutal Heart Rune of Grasping Vines, because in this case, you are lacking a little bit of oomph, a little bit of damage because you're playing a heavy loadout. This will actually allow you to secure some kills. And as I mentioned before, Stone Form, it's great. It will help you survive a little bit. But when you're playing a heavy loadout, you might not need that. So balancing it out, going for the Brutal Heart Rune of Grasping Vines is great. Now, assuming, like I said before, you're taking a ton of damage, you want to go Tower Shield, you can go for the Stone Form in the same kind of manner. That's about it for today. We showcased you guys the variations of medium and heavy weight load for the SNSGA build. Some pros and cons on all 3 different weight loads. Depending on your style, you'll probably find one for your fit. They're very enjoyable classes no matter what role you play it in. And I really hope you have some fun playing an OPR. Hopefully in June announcement we're going to have a little bit more content, and this way we can give you guys more PvP knowledge and more builds coming forward. For the meantime, have a good night everybody.